The haunting highway. The rain fell in heavy sheets, blurring the road ahead as Sarah gripped the steering wheel of her car. She was driving along an unfamiliar stretch of highway, trying to make it back home before the storm worsened. The radio crackled with static, offering no comfort or distraction from the solitude of the night. The road seemed to stretch into infinity, surrounded by dense trees that seemed to lean menacingly over the asphalt, their branches clawing at the rain-soaked air. The only light came from her car's headlights, which illuminated the road just enough to reveal its twists and turns. The windshield wipers squeaked as they struggled to keep up with the downpour. Sarah's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, and her grip on the wheel began to loosen. Suddenly, her headlights caught a fleeting glimpse of something standing in the middle of the road ahead. She slammed on the brakes, her heart racing as she skidded to a stop just inches away from a figure cloaked in shadows. The figure turned slowly, revealing a pale face with hollow eyes that seemed to reflect the very darkness of the night. Its tattered clothes clung to its emaciated frame, and its fingers ended in long, gnarled claws. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the grotesque sight before her. A shiver ran down her spine as the figure extended a bony hand towards her car, its eyes boring into hers with an intensity that sent a jolt of terror through her veins. Without warning, the figure let out a blood-curdling scream that seemed to reverberate through the air, causing Sarah to cover her ears and close her eyes in a futile attempt to block out the sound. When she dared to open her eyes again, the figure was gone. The road ahead was empty, and the rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle. Confused and shaken, Sarah wiped tears from her eyes and glanced around, her heart still pounding in her chest. Had it all been a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by fatigue? She shook her head, trying to dispel the fear that had taken hold of her. With trembling hands, she shifted the car back into gear and continued on her journey. But as the miles ticked away, a feeling of unease settled in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something was lurking just beyond the reach of her headlights. As the road wound its way through the darkness, Sarah's thoughts became increasingly erratic. Was the figure still out there, waiting for her? Or was it something else entirely? She strained her eyes, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. Every rustling of leaves, every flicker of movement in the corner of her eye sent a jolt of panic through her body. And then, just as suddenly as before, the figure reappeared, standing in the middle of the road ahead. Its eyes bore into hers once more, its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. Sarah's heart raced as she slammed on the brakes, her car skidding to a stop just as it had before. But this time, the figure didn't scream. It simply stood there, its presence suffocating and ominous. Without thinking, Sarah threw the car into reverse, her tires spinning on the wet asphalt as she tried to put distance between herself and the haunting figure. As she drove away, her rearview mirror reflected the image of the figure growing smaller and smaller until it was nothing more than a speck in the darkness. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she continued down the road, her mind racing with questions and fear. Hours later, as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Sarah finally reached her destination. She stumbled out of her car, her legs weak from exhaustion and terror. She glanced back at the road she had traveled, half expecting to see the figure standing there once more. But the road was empty, the morning light revealing nothing but an ordinary stretch of highway. Sarah leaned against her car, her heart still pounding as she realized she had escaped whatever malevolent presence had haunted her night drive. To this day, Sarah can't shake the feeling that she came face to face with something beyond human comprehension that night, something that had no intention of letting her go. And every time she drives down a dark, lonely road, she can't help but glance into the shadows, fearing that the haunting figure will return to claim her soul.
Subscribe Shadowy Shivers for more horror stories and contents.